This is Dominissimo Voxlore, delivering transmissions from the dark heart of the Imperium. In this broadcast, we summon you into the shadowed halls of judgment to walk beside the black-armoured enforcers of the Lex Imperialis, the Adeptus Arbites. It is not merely the account of law and order, but of sieges held against heretic uprisings, of courts broken in the darkness, of fortress walls that have stood for millennia against the tide of rebellion and war. By the authority of the High Lords of Terror, all law citizens are commanded to engage this transmission and strike the seal of subscription upon their data slates. Ready your will, bar your mind against temptation, and heed this decree. This is the voice of Dominissimo, and this is the allure of the Adeptus Arbites. Across a million worlds, the Adeptus Arbites stand where civilization thins to a whisper, and only the threat of sanction keeps the night at bay. They are not constables of a city block nor servants of a provincial charter. They are the Imperium's High Justice, the embodiment of the Lex Imperialis, empowered to intercede wherever infractions ripple beyond local statute into matters of imperial stability. The tithe, treason, sedition, and the great crimes that endanger the Emperor's domain. Their presence is a warning bell cast in black ceramite, seen, heard, and rarely misunderstood. The institution's mandate is ancient. Its judges and enforcers trace their charge to the Imperium's foundational age, when the nascent realm bound distant worlds to a single legal spine. What followed was not the gentle knitting of cultures, but the imposition of law designed to function at interstellar scale. In that architecture, the Arbites became the keystone, not subject to the whim of a planetary governor, or beholden to mercantile guilds, but answerable to terror alone. This distance from local patronage is no accident. It ensures that when a governor stalls a levy, a regiment deserts its oaths, or a court poisons the vox with sedition, the hammer falls without fear or favour. On every compliant world, a precinct fortress broods over the capital like a verdict awaiting delivery. These bastions are courthouses only by analogy. They are citadels. Within their walls lie scriptoria stacked with precedent, cogitator vaults that index centuries of rulings, armories where suppression shields stand in rank silence beside combat shotguns and power mauls, and cold cells that swallow secrets until confession or sentence makes them moot. If the wider city burns, the fortress does not debate evacuation plans, it becomes the spine of loyal order, its bastions anchoring curfews, cordons, and counterinsurgency until relief can be summoned across the stars. The Arbites move with procedure etched deeper than heraldry. Investigations begin where local authority ends, audit of tithe ledgers, seizure of vox traffic, cross-referencing shipping rights and rogue trader manifests, interrogations conducted beneath lumen bare ceilings. Where the trail winds into the sprawl of a hive, Verispec analysts unspool forensics from soot and blood. Where it climbs into the patrician towers, a judge's writ compels noble doors to open. The Arbites are not blind to hierarchy, they simply do not recognise it as a defence. Governors, factor lords and war captains find their titles weigh nothing on the scales once imperial statute is invoked. Their recruits arrive as products of the Schola Progenium, wards of the Imperium tempered by doctrine, endurance and an education that strips away provincial loyalties. From these, instructors carve arborators whose first language is procedure and whose second is force. Some are sent to the bench as judges, cloaked in a star authority and trained to interpret precedent against the necessities of a hostile galaxy. Others hone the arts of pursuit, breach and pacification, serving in snatch squads, right lines or undercover cadres that spend months sifting through ash-black markets and shrine fronts for the first threads of rebellion. Their methods are unadorned. In the press of a hab level, a file of black helms advances behind locking riot shields, shock mauls hummed with contained violence. In the marrow of a manufactorum, cyber mastiffs nose along conveyor arteries, augmetic jaws ready to pin a fugitive whose name is already a case number. At a starport, a boarding team cycles a bulkhead and steps into recirculated air with authority seals broadcasting on every channel. Holds are opened, manifests tallied, and contraband taken with the finality of law made visible. The Arbites do not pretend to be loved, they intend to be obeyed. Citizens, as a rule, have little recourse once implicated in matters of the Lex Imperialis. Common procedure does not mirror local trial custom, it is sterner and faster. A judge's sentence may be spoken in a chamber or on a rain-slick stairwell amid the wreckage of a riot line, but its weight is the same. Appeals exist for those whose station grants them the right to insist upon one, yet even these are bounded, and they are adjudicated by the same machinery that brought the case to heel. Mercy, when granted, is a tool of order, not a concession to sentiment. Yet the Arbites are not automatons. Their creed recognises that law without judgment becomes mere punishment. Judgment demands proof, and proof demands work. Case files grow dense with cogitator-stamped exhibits. Witness statements are cross-examined until either they align or collapse. Patterns of trade and pilgrimage, militia musters and shrine processions are mapped and tested against previous incidents across sectors and centuries. This is the quiet labour of the precinct. hours of unglamorous diligence that spare worlds from flamboyant catastrophe. Most citizens never see this work, they only remember the sound of a maul crackling to life when restraints fail. The wider Imperium measures the Arbites by outcomes, a tithe delivered full despite a harvest blight, a worker agitation that dissolves before it becomes a revolt, a heretical pamphlet network discovered and dismantled before it flowers into doctrine. Successes are not paraded, they are achieved. Failures are judged with a severity the Arbites reserve solely for themselves. Entire precincts have reorganised after lapses, their judges rotated, their procedures rewritten, their heraldic plates struck and reforged. A ritual reminder that precedent exists to prevent complacency, not to sanctify it. Symbolism matters. The black carapace and visor render the arbitrator both anonymous and inevitable. The aquila worn on the pauldron is not an ornament, but a statement that sovereignty is present, awake, and prepared to act. Even the cadence of their vox commands, precise, clipped, and intentionally unyielding, serves to cauterize panic. In a galaxy where fear is currency, projecting a certainty colder than fear can be kindness measured at a scale. Panic crushes more lives than measured volleys, and the Arbites understand this arithmetic. Beyond the street and bench, doctrine threads through the institution like wire. The Book of Judgment is not a single tome but a living corpus. Rulings, ratios, advisories, cautionary exemplars. Judges consulted as captains consult star charts, plotting courses through fresh crises by reading the scars of the old ones. In time, their own decisions join the strata, anonymised, reduced to principle, and made available to distant precincts facing cousins of the same malady. Thus the law remembers, and by remembering reacts faster than any single world could. Relations with other arms of imperial power follow custom rather than friendship. Administratum adepts provide figures, arbites confirm or contest them. Ecclesiarchy prelates preach obedience, arbites ensure it does not mutate into riot under the pressure of prophecy. The Mechanicus maintains tools that keep precincts sealed and shields crackling. The Arbites keep those tools from becoming a tyrant's private kit. The Inquisition is an exception. Its remits intersect but does not answer to the same scales. When Inquisitors request, the Arbites coordinate. When they command, the Arbites comply within the limits of statute. Friction is inevitable, collapse is optional. In the end, the Adeptus Arbites are less a collection of men and women than a continuity of function. Officers die, posts are reassigned, fortresses fall and then are rebuilt with the same floor plans and same kill lanes. What persists is the silhouette on a smoke-filled concourse, the sealed writ slid beneath a noble's door, the unflinching line across a boulevard that yesterday was a market and today is a boundary between order and something with too many mouths. The Imperium endures not because it is kind, but because it is kept. The keeping requires a hand steady enough to break what threatens it. The thin black line does not promise safety, it promises consequence. And in an age where consequence is often the only language still spoken, that promise is enough to make hives hesitate, a governor reconsider, a freighter captain open a sealed crate without introduction. Where the Arbites stand, the law is present. Where the law is present, the Imperium remains one realm instead of 100,000 Quarian fiefdoms. There are worlds where the Arbites banner has not flown for centuries, and yet the rumour of them disciplines harvest schedules and narrows the ambitions of petty tyrants. These are orbitals where a single squad, translated by chance at the right moment, has uncoiled an entire conspiracy by nothing more than insisting upon inventory, inspection and identity. This is their genius, not spectacle but pressure, applied in the correct place for as long as required. So the precinct doors remain shut until they open with purpose, the shields remain locked until they hinge into the wall, the mauls remain quiet until the signal, and then they speak. That brief grammar of force and verdict, the Imperium recognises itself, a state too vast to love all its citizens, yet grimly determined to keep them. The Adeptus Arbites make that determination real. They are the thin black line. It was the 32nd millennium, and the Imperium of man trembled. It was not rebellion or heresy that brought this dread, but the rising shadow of a Xenos empire the likes of which the galaxy had not seen before. From the void came the beast, a warlord of the Orcs so vast in scale and influence that entire worlds were consumed in a single campaign, their skies blotted out by colossal attack moons. Even Terra, the throne world itself, was no longer beyond the reach of alien invasion. The beast's greatest engines of war, artificial planetoids bristling with weapons, drifted into the Sol system like executioners approaching the gallows. Their arrival was not heralded by negotiation or posturing, but by planetary bombardments and the grinding descent of the Orc war machines. The Adeptus Arbites, sworn guardians of Imperial law, found themselves staring into a trial far greater than any court had prepared for them. The Arbites are not a battlefield army in the conventional sense. Their wars are waged in the alleys of hive cities, in the shadow halls of governors' palaces, in the tense standoff between crowd and riot line. Yet in this hour, the Lex and the Maul were forced to stand shoulder to shoulder with bolter and lasgun. The Orcs had not merely come to sack the throne world, they had brought panic in their wake, and panic is a contagion more dangerous than any alien weapon. Terror's hive districts erupted in unrest almost as soon as the void shields flared under Orc bombardment. Rumours spread faster than the Arbites could suppress them. Whispered tales that the Emperor's palace would fall, that the Astronomicon had flickered, that the Imperium itself was about to die. Food convoys were raided, administratum offices torched, and ancient rivalries between hive gangs reignited under the cloak of war. The Arbites' response was immediate and uncompromising. Precinct fortresses that had served for centuries as administrative hubs transformed overnight into forward command posts. Arbitrators deployed in force to seal transit hubs, secure armories, and take control of communication networks before sedition could spread any further. The Lex Imperialis was enforced at its harshest. Curfews were absolute, and the penalty for defiance was instant and terminal. Yet the true crucible came when the High Lords of Terror announced the Proletarian Crusade. In a move born of desperation, they called upon the masses to take up arms against the Orc attack moon hanging over the throne world. Millions of civilians, untrained and ill-equipped, were herded into the war zones alongside PDF regiments. The Arbites were ordered to serve as both enforcers and overseers, driving this colossal human tide toward the enemy. It was not strategy, it was sacrifice made flesh. The crusade collapsed in a slaughter. The Orcs met the assault with overwhelming firepower, their guns cutting down the mass ranks in their tens of thousands. Arbites formations caught in the maelstrom suffered devastating losses. Some squads fought to the last round, holding choke points to buy retreat for others. Others were simply swallowed whole by the tide of retreating, terrified civilians. In the span of hours, entire precinct contingents were erased from the rolls. And yet, the duty of the Arbites did not end on the killing fields. As the shattered remnants of the Crusade staggered back towards the hive cities, chaos erupted behind the lines. Riots flared in hab blocks swollen with refugees. Opportunists used the confusion to loot stockpiles, seize strategic machinery, and settle old vendettas. Even cult activity stirred in the shadows, sensing weakness in the fabric of Imperial control. With their numbers already crippled, the surviving Arbites were forced into a war on two fronts, one against the Orcs beyond the walls, and the other against disorder within. They executed rapid targeted strikes to behead riot leaders before mobs could swell beyond control. They sealed spaceport gates to prevent the flight of key industrial assets. Above all, they maintained the appearance of unbreakable authority, for in such times the perception of law is as vital as its enforcement. In these days, arbitrators patrolled in groups so small they could vanish in the smoke without a trace. Some precincts fell silent entirely, their defenders overwhelmed. But in others, squads held firm, their bastions become rallying points for surviving guard units and citizen militias still loyal to the throne. The Arbites' presence was a reminder, amid the burning hab towers and screaming flight corridors, that the Emperor's law had not yet abandoned terror. It was a grim calculus. Every arbitrator killed on the streets was one fewer to hold a line when the next riot broke out. But abandoning the streets altogether would mean ceding control of the heart of the Imperium to anarchy, even before the Orcs could claim it. So they stayed, each squad fighting an endless series of skirmishes, sometimes for entire days without reinforcement, across the shattered arteries of the throne world. When the beast was finally brought low, not by Terra's defenders alone, but by the combined might of the Imperium's greatest warriors, the cost was counted in oceans of blood. For the Arbites, the toll was catastrophic. Whole precincts had been wiped out. Generations of institutional memory, centuries of case records, and entire libraries of local precedent were reduced to rubble and ash. Yet despite this, the lines of jurisdiction and command remained intact. The surviving marshals immediately began reconstructing their forces, recalling arbitrators from off-world postings and rebuilding fortresses stone by stone. In the archives of the Hall of Judgment, the War of the Beast is recorded as not merely a military conflict, but as a test, a trial in which the Adeptus Arbites demonstrated their resilience when stripped of their usual weapons of patience and procedure. Faced with a war they were never meant to fight, they adapted, holding the Imperium's heart together with blood and decree. The lesson etched into that record is unflinching. The Adeptus Arbites do not require victory to fulfill their mandate. Their duty is to ensure that the machinery of the Imperium does not collapse under its own fear, even when the enemy is at the gates. They will stand in the breach not because they expect to live, but because without them, law itself dies, and with that, the Imperium. In the aftermath, when new recruits were inducted into the Black Carapace, their instructors spoke of the Orc moons and the fires of Terra's hives. They were told that the Arbites who had fought in the streets were not remembered for triumph, but for endurance. They were the thin black line, tested in a trial of iron and void fire, and they did not break. And so, in the long centuries after the beast was slain, the Arbites carried forward the unspoken verdict of that age, that even against an enemy who could tear the sky apart, the law must stand, steadfast, unyielding, and willing to pay whatever price is demanded to keep the Imperium whole. It was now the 36th millennium. The Imperium convulsed in on itself. It was not Xenos' invasion that again brought the realm to its knees, but the rule of one man, Goj Vandire, High Lord of the Administratum and through corruption and guile, the Ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum. For decades, he wielded the twin scepters of bureaucracy and faith to enforce his will over every world that paid tithe to terror. His reign was not one of stability, but of fear, fanaticism and slaughter, a period that would be remembered with whispered revulsion as the Reign of Blood. The Adeptus Arbites, whose purpose was to act as impartial executioners of the Lex Imperialis, were not spared from his influence. Vandire understood the Arbites were more than just armed jurists. They were the Imperium's spine of law. Control them and he could extend his reach into every hive spire, forge temple and governor's palace. Through political manoeuvre and outright decree, Vandire bent the Grand Provost Marshal and the upper tiers of Arbites' command to his authority. The effect was immediate. The black-armoured enforcers, long feared for their incorruptibility, now carried writs stamped with Vandire's own seal. Once the Arbites answered only to the High Lords as a collective, under Vandire's tyranny they answered to a single voice. The Lex Imperialis, immutable in principle, was twisted in practice to legitimise executions, suppress dissent and silence entire planetary populations deemed treasonous for questioning Vandire's divine mandate. A noble refusing to overpay his tithe, a factory overseer whose production numbers displeased terror, even an ecclesiastical cardinal whose loyalty was suspect, any could be condemned with the same efficiency once reserved for true seditionists and traitors. On 1,000 worlds the transformation was stark. Arbites' precinct fortresses that once functioned as cold, impartial bastions of law became black citadels of political oppression. Arrest rolls swelled with the names of guild leaders, scribes and pilgrims. Trials were perfunctory or omitted altogether. Judges who resisted found themselves stripped of rank or declared renegades, replaced by Vandire's chosen loyalists. The Arbites' grim reputation for impartial justice was replaced by a new image, agents of the High Lord's wrath. The streets ran red not with the blood of criminals, but with the lifeblood of the disobedient. In hive cities from Hydrapor to Scintilla, mass executions were staged in public squares to strengthen the faith of the people. Entire hab blocks were torched to root out heresy. Their inhabitants burned alive under the gaze of the Arbites squad who had once prided themselves on precision and proportionality. The Arbites war gear, riot shields, suppression walls, combat shotguns, were turned from tools of law enforcement into instruments of political terror. Resistance was fractured and dangerous. Isolated judges and arbitrators attempted to uphold the true Lex Imperialis by hiding fugitives or falsifying reports to protect innocents, but they did so under the constant threat of discovery. A single informer's whisper could bring an Arbites Trastener to their door, with interrogation ending in confession, and an unmarked grave. Even loyalists within the Arbites were forced into secrecy, waiting for a moment when Vandire's grip might falter. That moment came with the rise of Sebastian Thor, a charismatic preacher whose defiance of Vandire sparked a civil and religious movement. Thor's sermons, carried across the void by sympathetic astropaths, condemned the blasphemy of claiming divine sanction for tyranny. His followers, numbering in the billions, refused to submit to Vandire's decrees. The rebellion was not merely spiritual, it was a war of worlds, fought as much in the streets and plazas as in the void. For the Arbites, the age of apostasy became a test of institutional identity. Many precincts remained loyal to Vandire, executing his orders with unquestioning brutality. Others quietly shifted their allegiance to Thor's cause, offering covert assistance or simply refusing to enforce certain edicts. The schism was dangerous. An Arbites force divided against itself, but open defiance was rare. To act against Vandire without the protection of Thor's growing forces was to invite swift annihilation. The end came within the walls of the Imperial Palace itself. The brides of the Emperor, the elite warrior maidens of Vandire's personal guard, turned against him after an intervention by the Adeptus Custodes. They confronted Vandire with the reality of his crimes, their faith finally severed from his lies. His death was not recorded in public detail, but with his passing the reign of terror collapsed almost overnight. In the power vacuum that followed, the Adeptus Arbites were confronted with the grim truth of their complicity. On Terra, and throughout the Segmenta, loyalist judges led purges of their own ranks. Those who had abused their authority in Vandire's name were tried under the very laws they had perverted. Some were executed. Others were exiled to penal colonies or condemned to servitorhood. In the Hall of Judgment, the Grand Provost Marshal stood before the assembled High Marshals, reaffirmed the Arbites' primary oath, not to a man, but to the Lex Imperialis itself. The reforms that followed were subtle but significant. Checks were placed upon the Arbites' chain of command to make it harder for a single individual, even a High Lord, to monopolise their loyalty. Greater emphasis was placed on the study of legal precedent and the limits of authority, alongside the ever-present training in arms and discipline. The scars of the Reign of Blood would not fade quickly, but the institution had survived, tempered by the knowledge that its greatest vulnerability lay not in its enemies, but in the corruption of its own purpose. Historians within the Adeptus Arbites, quiet scholars who maintain the archives of Precedent, record the Reign of Blood as a dark chapter, not because the law failed to act, but because it acted as the weapon of a despot. For the enforcers of Imperial law, the lesson was immutable. To uphold the Emperor's will, they must defend the law from those who would use it to chain the very people it was meant to protect. The Reign of Blood left more than bodies in its wake. It left a caution etched into every oath taken by a new arbitrator. The black carapace, the shock maul, the badge of the Aquila, all are symbols of the law's permanence, but they were also reminders of the law's fragility in the wrong hands. When sworn in, every recruit is told the same closing words. The law is above all, and all are beneath the law. You are not the law, you are its servant. Forget this, and you will become its enemy. In the 10,000 years since the Reign of Blood, the Adeptus Arbites have been called upon to face Xenos invasions, planetary uprisings, and heretical cults without end. But never again they allowed themselves to serve the ambitions of a single mortal over the eternal authority of the Lex Imperialis. In the shadow of Vandire's tyranny, the thin black line was tested, and in fire, it was reforged. The Adeptus Arbites are not a mob of enforcers, nor a loose confederation of watchmen. They are a meticulously engineered hierarchy, a judicial machine that has endured for 10,000 years, without collapsing into the chaos it was created to oppose. Every arbitrator's step, every judge's verdict, every fortress's gatehouse is part of a design whose lines were drawn in the earliest years of the Imperium, and have been maintained with the precision of a cathedral's vaulting. At the apex stands the Grand Provost Marshal, a High Lord of Terror and one of the most influential individuals in the galaxy. From the Hall of Judgment on Holy Terror, the Grand Provost Marshal directs the Arbites across all segmenta, issuing edicts that ripple outward along interstellar lines of command. These pronouncements do not simply change the way a precinct operates, they recalibrate the mechanisms of law across entire sectors. The Grand Provost Marshal's seat among the Senatorium Imperialis ensures that Imperial law is voiced alongside the dictates of the Adeptus Administratum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Ecclesiarchy, preventing the voice of justice from being drowned out by the rhetoric of power. Beneath this central figure, the Arbite structure unfolds like a map of the Imperium itself. Lord Marshals oversee segmentum-wide operations, while Sector Marshals command the Arbites within their respective sectors, ensuring that the Emperor's law is applied evenly from the core worlds to the most distant outposts. At the planetary level, the Arbites' authority is embodied in the High Marshal or Chief Judge, who acts as both supreme legal authority and military commander for the local precinct fortress. The fortress itself is the primary organ of the Arbites' power. A precinct is not merely an office of law, it is a bastion in the most literal sense, an adamantine-clad citadel built to withstand sieges, bombardments, and evil orbital strikes. Its architecture reflects its dual purpose. The outer bulwarks and firing ports speak to its military function, while the internal halls, archives, and court chambers are dedicated to the precise administration of the Lex Imperialis. Within its walls, law is processed, evidence is catalogued, sentences decreed, and military actions planned. The work of the Arbites is divided into clearly defined branches, each vital to the function of imperial justice. Judges are the interpreters of the law, trained for years in the vast complexities of the Lex Imperialis. They are steeped in the study of precedent, the histories of sector rulings, and the subtleties of interstellar legal codes. Their authority is absolute within their jurisdiction, and their word is binding across the Imperium. A judge may oversee a trial, interrogate an accused planetary governor, or issue an immediate sentence on the strength of clear evidence. Where the judges pronounce, the arbitrators act. These are the armoured black-helmed enforcers most citizens envision when they think of the Arbites. Disciplined formations advancing through hive streets, combat shotguns at the ready, shock mauls humming with energy. They execute warrants, lead raids on heretic dens, maintain order during mass gatherings, and act as the visible hand of the Emperor's law. Though feared for their ruthless efficiency, they are no blunt instrument. Their discipline allows them to operate with precision, applying lethal or non-lethal force as the situation demands. Supporting these core roles are the specialist cadres who keep the Arbites apparatus running. Verispec's units are forensics experts, skilled at extracting information from a single blood strain, a fragment of parchment, or a corrupted data core. Chasteners are the interrogators, trained in psychological manipulation, sanctioned torture, and the use of truth serums to extract confessions and intelligence from the unwilling. Psychana deputies, rare but invaluable, are sanctioned psychos used sparingly, often to sense deception or detect traces of warped taint. Undercover operations fall to detective arbitrators who embed themselves within criminal cartels, seditionist networks, and cult cells for months or years, building a case until it can all be dismantled in its entirety. These officers often work in small, isolated teams, their very existence unknown to most of their colleagues until the cases explode into action. The Arbites hierarchy is rigid, but its communications are not one way. Information flows upward as well as downward, with local precincts reporting not only their successes, but also the data, patterns, and precedents that will help inform future rulings. These reports are compiled into the Book of Judgment, a vast living corpus of Imperial law that is constantly updated, cross-referenced, and disseminated through the Arbites network. A ruling on one world can thus influence the way a similar case is handled light years away, ensuring consistency in the application of justice across the Imperium. This meticulous structure extends beyond personnel and into the physical infrastructure of the Arbites. Every precinct fortress is designed according to a standardised template, allowing an arbitrator from one world to operate seamlessly in another. Armories are laid out with identical racks for suppression shields and combat shotguns. Evidence archives follow the same coding systems. Communication rooms have identical Voxbank configurations. This uniformity is not simply about efficiency. It reinforces the notion that each precinct is not an isolated outpost, but a node in a galaxy-spanning network. Training within the Arbites is unrelenting. Recruits from the Scholar Progenium are subjected to rigorous academic and physical regimens. Legal instruction covers the entirety of the Lex Imperialis, case law from multiple sectors, and study of prior judgments. Combat training encompasses urban warfare, breaching techniques, crowd control, and counterinsurgency tactics. Psychological conditioning hardens them against bribery, intimidation, and moral compromise. By the time they earn the acquittal of the Arbites, they are as adept at delivering a closing argument as they are at storming a fortified hat block. Interfacing with other branches of the Imperium requires diplomacy as much as authority. The Adeptus Administratum provides the figures and records that form the basis for many investigations. The Astra Militarum and the Arbites occasionally coordinate during planetary crisis, with the arbitrators acting as military police for guard regiments or securing supply lines. The Ecclesiarchy is both an ally and a friction point. Arbites may be called upon to protect shrines and pilgrimages, but also to contain excess when faith becomes fanaticism. Relations with the Inquisition are perhaps the most complex. Arbites will yield jurisdiction to an Inquisitor's seal, but expect that seal to be wielded within the bounds of Imperial law. The power of the Arbites is balanced by their own strict internal oversight. Investigators are appointed to monitor precinct operations, ensuring that no judge exceeds their remit and the arbitrators maintain the discipline expected of them. Infraction within the ranks are punished swiftly and severely, for the Arbites know that corruption in the enforcers of law is more dangerous than any street riot. All of these elements, the centralised command, the fortress network, the branching hierarchy of roles, the constant refinement of legal precedent, compose the anatomy of Imperial justice. It is a system designed to be unyielding, immune to local politics, and incorruptible in its purpose. In the chaos of the 41st millennium, where war and heresy gnaw constantly at the edges of civilization, this anatomy functions as the Imperium skeleton, rigid enough to support the whole vast structure, but flexible enough to react to sudden blows. The Adeptus Arbites endure because they are more than warriors and more than jurists. They are an embodiment of an idea, that law, once forged in the Emperor's name, must be preserved with the same vigour as any holy relic or military stronghold. From the High Lord's Council to the lowest manufacturer floor, that idea is enforced, not requested. In their anatomy lies the Imperium's capacity to endure itself, to remain one realm despite the ceaseless pressures of the galaxy. Where their black armour advances, the anatomy of Imperial justice moves with it. Every muscle, every nerve, every bone aligned in the service to the Emperor's law. And it is this unbroken body, more than any fortress wall or starship gun, that keeps the Imperium from tearing itself apart. The Adeptus Arbites do not police the petty quarrels between neighbours, nor do they spend their days chasing the cut purse through the crowd. Those duties are left to the local enforcers bound by provincial statutes. The Arbites operate on a plane far above such matters, an orbit from which they watch for crimes that threaten not a single street, but the very integrity of the Imperium. They are the Emperor's law, written in flesh and steel, and their remit is as wide as the stars themselves. Their quarry is the traitor governor who hoards or withholds the Emperor's tithe, the noble house that conspires with Xenos to bolster its power, the Manufactorum cartel whose dealings choke a sector's war machine. They are summoned when whispers of sedition begin to coil through a hive, or when the trade guilds grow bold enough to dictate terms to the Administratum. They come not to negotiate, but to decide, impartially, irrevocably, and often with lethal finality. In the great hives, their presence is felt before it is seen. Informants seeded through the strata of society feed reports into the precinct's cogitator stacks. Vox intercepts sweep for forbidden rhetoric. Anonymous accusations are sifted and cross-referenced against patterns known to precede unrest. Once the pieces align, the Arbites act without hesitation. To delay is to give corruption a chance to root itself, and they know from centuries of experience that pulling such roots later will cost far more blood. An operation begins with the issuing of a writ of action from the judge's chambers. The writ is a concise document, but its authority is vast. It allows arbitrators to cross any boundary, void any local law, and seize any person named within. When the target is a planetary official, the writ often contains multiple secondary warrants to prevent allies from interfering. In these moments, rank and privilege offer no shield. The Arbites are bound to neither planetary favour nor sector politics, only the Emperor's will, codified in the Lex Imperialis, determining their course. Deployment is tailored to the scale of the offence. For a lone conspirator, a snatch squad might descend in the dead of night, masked and silent, to take the suspect from his bed before the first watch change. For a cabal of nobles or a seditious guild, the Arbites may commit entire companies. They roll out in repressor armoured carriers, blocking intersections with adamantine hulls, while combat shotguns and suppression shields herd the accused towards judgment. Each move is calculated to impose shock. Psychological dominance is as powerful as any of their weapons. When arrest is not possible, the Arbites employ measures sanctioned by the highest authority. Sabotage, the dismantling of supply chains, even the systematic destruction of infrastructure to deny it to insurgents. If the survival of a planet's lawful governance demands it, they will burn the seed to save the soil. The law allows no sentiment where the Emperor's realm is at stake. The Arbites are no strangers to infiltration. Detective arbitrators spend months in assumed identities, their carapace and insignia locked away, as they move among smugglers, seditionists and cultists. They learn the rhythms of criminal enterprise from inside, mapping its structure for a decisive strike. Such work is dangerous, not merely for the constant threat of discovery, but for the slow, grinding erosion of working in close proximity to the very corruption they hunt. Many never return from these assignments. Their disappearance is recorded in the Book of Judgment as lost in the Emperor's service, a phrase that covers everything from a knife in the dark to willful defection. Technology is as vital to their work as discipline. Precinct cogitators maintain vast archives of case law, investigation records and planetary profiles, enabling Arbites analysts to recognise patterns of crimes across systems and centuries. Forensic teams deploy Verispec scanners capable of reading chemical traces in a single drop of water or reconstructing a destroyed data slate from its warped fragments. The chasteners, masters of interrogation, use sanctioned neural probes, sensory deprivation, and hypnotic suggestion to extract the truth, though the truth is never accepted without corroborating evidence. The law may be harsh, but it must also be exact, for a flawed judgment undermines the very authority it seeks to preserve. Their presence extends far beyond planetary capitals. Arbites detachments operate aboard void ships, patrolling the arteries of interstellar commerce. They inspect manifests, investigate missing cargoes, and ensure that trade accords are honoured. They have the authority to board rogue trader vessels, search them stem to stern, and seize contraband without the captain's consent, an authority that even those bearing the ancient warrant of trade tread carefully around. In the void as on the ground, the Arbites are the Emperor's eyes and fists. Despite their formidable power, the Arbites are not free to act on a whim. Every action must be justified according to the Lex Imperialis, and records are meticulously kept to ensure accountability. The archives of the Arbites are not merely repositories of past deeds, they are a living memory of Imperial justice, a record that could be cited centuries later to shape new verdict. Arbitrators are trained not only to enforce law, but to understand it, to wield it with precision as one would a blade. In times of war, their role shifts but does not diminish. They may serve as military police for the Astra Militarum, ensuring discipline in the ranks and guarding against infiltration by heretics or alien agents. In besieged cities, they coordinate with the guard to maintain civil order, direct evacuations, and prevent looting. They are also tasked with ensuring that Imperial commanders do not exceed their authority, a duty that has, on rare infamous occasions, seen Arbites units clash openly with the very armies they were assigned to support. The Arbites' work is rarely celebrated. Their successes are measured in the absence of chaos, their victories in the silence after an operation is complete. The citizens who see them pass in the streets seldom know whether the arbitrators are moving towards a trial, an execution, or the dismantling of a conspiracy that would have toppled their world. In this lies the paradox of the Adeptus Arbites. They are the most feared and most necessary servants of the Imperial Order, and they are the most effective when they are least visible. What defines them is not their weapons, nor even their authority, but their consistency. Empires rise and fall, High Lords come and go, but the Adeptus Arbites remain the same, the thin black line, ever vigilant, ever poised to strike at those who would gnaw at the foundations of the Imperium. They are agents not of a single ruler, but of the law itself, and in the grim darkness of the far future, the law must be merciless and enduring as the galaxy is hostile. Where the Arbites operate, the Emperor's hand is present. Where they pass sentence, it is final. And where they stand watch, the enemies of Imperial Order learn that there is no crime so well hidden, no treachery so well laid, that it will not be uncovered and judged in the Emperor's name. Rising from the heart of every major Imperial world, the precinct fortress of the Adeptus Arbites is more than a headquarters. It is the embodiment of Imperial law made stone and steel. These are not civic buildings meant to inspire the public of ideals of fairness. They are fortifications designed to survive siege, orbital bombardment, and the slow decay of centuries. Every wall, every gate, every killing field speaks to the reality that justice in the Imperium is not a matter of debate, but a fact enforced at gunpoint. The precinct fortress is as much a military installation as it is a judicial centre. Most are built according to ancient templates approved on Terra millennia ago, their blueprints archived in the Hall of Judgment and issued to planetary governors with the same finality as a tithing edict. The designs vary only as much as terrain and planetary climate demand, whether rising from a hive's upper spire, carved into a mountain range, or anchored deep into the bedrock beneath a capital city. The precinct's outer profile is unmistakable, looming curtain walls, reinforced gates, and towers crowned with vox arrays and weapon emplacements. Approach to a precinct is intentionally intimidating. The avenues leading to its gates are long and exposed, ensuring any who come, be they common petitioner, summoned noble, or prisoner under guard, are fully visible to the marksmen stationed in the gun ports above. Layers of blast doors and security fields separate the outer gate from the inner courtyard. Access is controlled by arbitrators armed and armoured for war, their black carapace gleaming under stark lumen strips, each one ready to enforce the Emperor's law without hesitation. Inside, the precinct fortress is a city within a city, divided into sections according to strict function. The Hall of Judgment lies at its core, a cavernous chamber where judges preside over trials and deliver sentences beneath the twin-headed Aquila. This hall is flanked by secure antechambers for the accused, interrogation suites for the chasteners, and archives containing centuries, sometimes millennia, of legal precedent. These archives are more than dusty records. They are armoured vaults of cogitator banks, hollow scribed testimonies, and relic cases of physical evidence, all maintained to preserve the continuity of imperial justice across the ages. Adjacent to the judicial chambers lie the barracks, self-contained are store blocks where arbitrators live under constant readiness. Each barracks connects directly to the armories, where riot shields, suppression mauls, executioner shotguns and heavier weapons are kept in perfect order. Vehicles from bike patrols to repressed armoured carriers are housed in motor bays ready for immediate deployment. The design ensures that an arbite's response time can be mounted within minutes of an alarm, whether to suppress a riot in a hive sector or repel an armed assault on the fortress itself. Deeper still are the detention levels, the cells and isolation chambers where prisoners are held until trial, transport or execution. These are not places of comfort or negotiation. They are cold, featureless and designed to strip a detainee of any illusion of power. For those deemed especially dangerous, traitor officers, planetary officials accused of sedition or known agents of heretical cults, containment cells are laid with psychic dampeners, auto turrets and life sign monitors tied to the fortress command post. Many precincts also house Verispex laboratories, equipped for forensic analysis of both mundane and highly unusual evidence. Here, chemical analysis, data decryption and even xenological examination take place under the strictest security. The laboratories are often positioned near the secure evidence vaults where seized weapons, documents and artifacts are locked away under multiple layers of coded seals until required in court or ongoing investigations. Strategically, the precinct fortress is designed to be self-sufficient in the event of planetary unrest or prolonged siege. They contain internal water reserves, food stores and power generation systems capable of sustaining the garrison for months without outside support. Some are connected to hidden underground transit lines, allowing arbitrators to deploy covertly across the city without passing through vulnerable streets. Others are linked directly to starports or void shield control hubs, ensuring that arbites can act to safeguard or seize critical infrastructure at a moment's notice. The defensive systems of a precinct rival those of a military redoubt. Walls are built from layered ceramite and adamantium plating, resistant to everything short of sustained orbital fire. Automated defence turrets guard the outer approaches, while heavy bolters and autocannons line the ramparts. In many cases, the precinct's command tower doubles as an anti-air platform, capable of engaging enemy aircraft or dropships attempting to land assault forces within the city. Yet the fortress's most potent defence lies in its design as a choke point. Any force attempting to breach the outer gates must pass through a series of kill zones, each overlooked by firing slits, murdering holes and overlapping arcs of heavy weapons. Even if the enemy gains entry, the fortress interior is a labyrinth of blast doors, angled corridors and killing chambers intended to slow and bleed attackers until the defenders can regroup and counterattack. Culturally, the precinct fortress is a symbol of the Arbite's authority. Its looming presence reminds the citizenry that the Emperor's law is not an abstract concept, but a power with walls, gates and garrisons. Public executions are sometimes staged in the forecourts to drive the lesson home. The fortress is not a place for the common citizenry to enter lightly. Its gates are thresholds crossed only under the summons, under guard or under oath. Despite their imposing nature, precincts are also the hubs of quiet methodical activity. Arbitrators study case files in briefing rooms, judges confer over precedent and evidence, training drills echo through combat halls. The black armour patrols that emerge from the gates are only the visible tip of a much larger, more deliberate process, a process that begins and ends within the fortress walls. In times of planetary crisis, the precinct fortress becomes the centre of coordinated response. Communication hubs in the command centre link directly to sector level Arbite's command, and in emergencies to the Hall of Judgment on Terra. Orders can be issued to every Arbites detachment on the planet within seconds, whether to impose a system-wide curfew, secure a governor's palace, or deploy an armoured unit to reinforce a crumbling front. The fortress also serves as the last redoubt should a city fall, its final bastion holding out long after the surrounding streets have been abandoned to the enemy. There are worlds where the precinct fortresses stood for millennia, enduring siege after siege, uprising after uprising, its walls repaired but never rebuilt, its archives growing ever thicker with the record of sentences passed and justice done. In the Chronicles of the Arbites, such places are not merely strongholds, they are sacred sites, monuments to the endurance of Imperial law in a galaxy where so much else crumbles. The Precinct Fortress is, in every sense, the heart of the Adeptus Arbites mission. From its gates marches the will of the Emperor. Within its walls the law is preserved, studied and enforced with the precision of a well-oiled war engine. And should the Imperium's enemies, alien, heretic or traitor, dare to challenge its authority, the fortress stands ready to remind them that justice in the 41st millennium is not a matter of words, but of bastions, weapons, and the unbreakable resolve of those who guard them. Pavonis was not a shrine world, nor a fortress world, nor even a particularly wealthy planet. It was a temperate agri-industrial world in the Ultima Segmentum, valued for its manufactoria, shipyards and stable governance. But in the 41st millennium, stability is never permanent. Beneath the hum of its factories and the steady rhythm of its harvests, the seeds of rebellion had been sown. Those seeds would sprout into a crisis that tested the Adeptus Arbites to the very limits, a defence remembered as the last stand on Pavonis. The trouble began subtly. Trade guilds in the hive cities began disputing shipping tariffs with the administratum. Workers' strikes had halted production in key manufactoria, and food shipments from agri-planes began arriving late, or not at all. Local enforcers, accustomed to dealing with petty crime and labour disputes, found themselves overwhelmed by the scale of unrest. It was the Adeptus Arbites who first saw the pattern in the data flowing in the precinct fortresses. This was not a simple labour agitation, it was coordinated. The Arbites Verispec teams discovered coded message hidden in mundane supply reports, directing disparate factions to act in concert. Worse still, intercepted Vox traffic suggested an alliance between the rebel guild leaders and an off-world syndicate, an arrangement that smacked of sedition on a planetary scale. The Lex Imperialis was clear. Rebellion against Imperial authority, particularly where it endangered tithes and production quotas, was treason. A writ of suppression was issued. Arbitrators in black carapace armour deployed to seize ringleaders and cut the communications that tied the rebellion together. Initial raids were surgical and effective. Several guildmasters were taken alive, along with data slates confirming their coordination. But success bred desperation in the enemy. Within days, riots erupted in Hive Justicar and Hive Fortuna. Arbites patrols were ambushed in the Underhive, their bodies left in public squares as a rallying cry to the rebels. Then came the shock that transformed unrest into war. The rebels struck directly at the Pavonis primary starport, overrunning its defences before the Arbites reinforcements could arrive. Cargo haulers and fuel silos were seized, giving the insurgents both the means to arm themselves and the threat of immolating the port entirely. Pavonis' governor, paralysed by fear of escalation, hesitated. The Arbites did not. From the precinct fortress in Hive Justicar, High Marshal Brant Voren took direct command of all Arbites forces on the planet. Recognising that conventional suppression was no longer viable, he ordered the consolidation of all loyalist forces into the fortress. The orders were clear: Pavonis would hold, or the law would die with it. The rebels came in force. Their ranks were swollen with Underhive gangers, disillusioned manufactorum workers, and mercenaries bought with stolen guild funds. They attacked in waves, using captured mining haulers and armoured loaders as improvised assault vehicles. Each day, the fortress walls were tested. Each night, the rebels dug closer through the ruins of nearby districts, hoping to breach the outer curtain. Within the fortress, discipline never faltered. Arbitrators patrolled the battlements between firefights, their shock maws and suppression shields replaced with heavy stubbers and bolters for the siege. Verispec's analysts worked without rest to intercept Vox traffic, predicting their assaults before they came. Chasteners interrogated captured insurgents, extracting locations of supply caches for nighttime counter-raids. Food and ammunition became as precious as air. Civilians lured to the Imperium were brought inside the fortress, swelling the already strained resources. The Arbites rationed everything, even power from the lumen strips. The Hall of Judgment became a makeshift triage centre, its benches crowded with the wounded while Medicaid teams worked under the Emperor's gaze. The rebels made their greatest push on the 12th day of the siege. Under cover of a chemical fog released from captured manufactoria, they launched simultaneous assaults on north and west gates. Demolition teams tried to collapse the gates while masses of fighters pressed forward under the cover of the smoke. The defenders responded with withering fire from the ramparts, grenade launchers saturating the choke points while marksmen picked off leaders and heavy weapons crews. High Marshal Voren himself led the counterattack at the west gate, driving the rebels back with a shock maul in one hand and a combat shotgun in the other. The fight degenerated into brutal close quarters, the courtyard slick with rain and blood. When the smoke cleared, the gate still stood, but the Arbites had paid in lives for every metre held. Relief came not from the governor's palace, but from the void. An Adeptus Astartes strike cruiser, answering a call from the wider sector, translated into orbit. The chapter, whose name the Arbites record keeps redacted, launched precision drop pod assaults on rebel strongholds, shattering the cohesion of insurgent forces. With their command structure broken and their supplies in ruins, the rebels fractured. The Arbites waited no time. Exhausted, wounded, and low on ammunition, they nonetheless poured out of the fortress to hunt down the remnants of the rebellion. Every ringleader was brought to trial under the Lex Imperialis. Some were executed publicly, their bodies displayed as a warning. Others were sentenced to penal servitude off-world, their fate sealed in the dust of a faraway battlefield. When order returned to Pavonis, the cost became clear. Of the original Arbites garrison, more than half had fallen in the siege. The fortress walls were scarred and pitted from sustained bombardment. Whole districts of Hive Justicar lay in ruins. But the law had held. The tides would flow once more, and Pavonis would remain in the Emperor's light. The last stand on Pavonis became a case study in the Arbites archives, a lesson in siegecraft, resource management, and the unyielding necessity of discipline under fire. For recruits at the Scholar Purginium, it is taught not as a tale of glory, but as an example of the price of failure to detect sedition early. The cost in lives, material, and civilian suffering was immense. The preservation of imperial authority was the only acceptable measure of success. In the centuries since, Pavonis has remained loyal, though the scars of the rebellion linger in its underhives. The precinct fortress, rebuilt and reinforced, stands as a silent monument to the siege. Its walls bear the names of the fallen etched in adamantium plates, a reminder to all who enter that the Emperor's law is held not by the words alone, but by those willing to fight, bleed, and die to uphold it. The last stand on Pavonis proved once again the truth known across a million worlds. The Adeptus Arbites do not retreat from their duty. When the fortress is surrounded, when the gates shake beneath the enemy's blows, when the air is thick with the smoke and the sky with fire, they hold. And in holding, they keep the Imperium whole. Ichar IV was a mining world in the eastern fringe, a place of dust-clogged skies, pit slave labour, and the grinding rhythm of ore convoys heading to distant forge worlds. It was not known for political intrigue or open defiance of imperial authority. Its obedience to the tithe and the Lex Imperialis had been consistent for centuries. That is why, when the Adeptus Arbites first detected signs of unrest, the initial reports were met with disbelief. The disturbances began in the lower strata of the mining hives. Shift crews started refusing assignments, citing visions from the Skyfather and prophecies of liberation from imperial tyranny. At first, local enforcers attributed the incidents to exhaustion and minor superstition, common enough in deep workings. But when several administratum clerks disappeared, their offices stripped of records, the Arbites were brought in. From the moment the first Verispex team entered the Underhive, the signs were unmistakable. Symbols daubed in alien script lined the walls. Cogitator access ports had been tampered with, their data core locks bypassed with technology of unknown origin. Even more disturbing were the accounts from informants, gatherings in the dark, chants in strange tongues, and children born with subtle deformities. The Arbites knew the implications. This was no simple sedition, it was the work of a gene-stealer cult. Left unchecked, such a movement would not only overthrow the world's imperial governance, but prepare it for the arrival of a Tyranid fleet. The urgency of the threat was beyond dispute. High Marshal Drennick Solvar assumed direct control of the operation. His first act was to impose a planet-wide communications quarantine. All astropathic messages were screened and all off-world traffic halted. He could not risk word of the uprising reaching the cult masters in the void. Next, he authorised the immediate expansion of Arbites patrol in the lower hives, supported by armoured repressors equipped with Auspex scanners tuned to detect concealed tunnels. The cult responded with calculated precision. Isolated Arbites squads were ambushed in collapsing hab blocks. Convoys were struck by mining charges detonated beneath the roadways. Entire precinct outposts in the deep zones went silent, the garrisons either slaughtered or absorbed into the cult. Each counterstrike by the Arbites uncovered more evidence of the enemy's reach. Local enforcer precincts compromised, manufactura cells in occultist hands, and mid-ranking administratum officials revealed as broodkin. Solvar recognised the danger of allowing the cult to remain in the shadows. A single coordinated uprising could cripple the planetary government in hours. To forestall this, he ordered a preemptive sweep of the mining hives, focusing on the sectors with the highest concentration of suspected broodkin. This was not a targeted arrest, it was a purge. Arbites squads moved in with shock and speed, streets were sealed with portable barricades, Auspex sweeps identified heat signatures within hab blocks and doors were breached in simultaneous strikes. Anyone resisting was shot on the spot, suspected cult leaders were dragged into custody for immediate interrogation. In many cases, the cells had abandoned only hours before, their occupants warned by sympathisers higher up in the hive. The cult's counterattack was swift. Saboteurs infiltrated the upper levels, striking at water treatment plants and power stations to plunge entire districts into chaos. In the confusion, mass gatherings of cultists erupted in the lower streets, their leaders preaching the ascension of the Sky Father and urging for the faithful to rise against the oppressors. For the Arbites, the situation became a war on two fronts, suppressing open riots while hunting down the cult's inner circle before they could trigger a full planetary insurrection. Solvar deployed Chastener teams to break the will of captured broodkin, extracting the locations of key lairs. One such interrogation yielded the coordinates of a subterranean cathedral behind the mining hive of Mornville, a site where the cult's patriarch was said to dwell. The assault on Mornville was conducted with military precision. Repressors smashed through the outer approaches, their heavy flamers spewing fire into the choke points. Arbitrators had advanced in disciplined formations, las and shotgun fire cutting down the cultists who charged with claw and blade. The deeper they pressed, the more warped the architecture became. Mining tunnels reshaped into alien curves, the walls studded with chitinous growths. At the heart of the warren they found the cathedral, a vast chamber lit by bioluminescent nodules, its altar a pulsing mound of alien tissue. There, the patriarch awaited, a monstrous fusion of man and tyrannid, its psychic will pressing against the minds of the attackers. Even the most disciplined arbitrators faltered under the mental assault, some turning their weapons on their own comrades. Solvar himself led the final charge. He and his personal guard unleashed a storm of firepower, supported by flamers that turned the altar into an inferno. The patriarch's psychic scream echoed through the tunnels as it burned, its brood surging forward in a final frenzied defence. The fighting was brutal and close. Shock mauls cracked skulls, suppression shields shattered under clawed blows, but when the smoke cleared, the patriarch was dead, its body reduced to ash and ichor. The death of the patriarch did not end the fighting overnight. The cult's remnants continued to resist in scattered pockets, some hiding among the general populace, others retreating into deep tunnels. Over the following weeks, the Arbites conducted a relentless sweep, eradicating every trace of Brucan influence they could find. Thousands were executed after summary trials, others were shipped to off-world penal colonies for labour until death. By the campaign's end, Ichar IV was scarred. Entire hive districts had been gutted by fire and demolition charges. Production quotas fell behind schedule, and the administratum warned of punitive sanctions. But the deeper threat had been averted. The cult was destroyed before it could signal the Tyranids, and the planet remained under Imperial control. In the Arbites archive, the Ichar IV uprising is remembered as a textbook example of decisive intervention against Xenos cults. The case notes emphasised the necessity of speed, the dangers of infiltration at the administrative level, and the psychological resilience required to face the Patriarch's psychic presence. Recruits at the Scholar Purging studied the operation not for its glory, but for its proof that the law must sometimes be enforced with the ferocity of war. The Lex Imperialis does not distinguish between the traitor who breaks his oath for gold and the heretic who serves alien masters. On Ichar IV, the Adeptus Arbites proved that they were prepared to face both with equal resolve. They were the Emperor's law in the darkness beneath the hive, and when the last shot echoed and the last cultist fell, they stood alone amid the ruin, their duty done, their watch unbroken. Typhos Prime was a world of smoke and steel, a forged planet whose tithe of weapons and armour was essential to the Imperial war efforts along the Segmentum Pacificus frontier. Its manufactoria sprawled for kilometres, great hives of fire and industry where the air was thick with ash and the ground trembled from endless rhythm of production. For centuries it had been a model of industrial obedience, until the disease came. It was slow at first, workers falling ill in a single manufactorium block, their bodies mottled with blackened sores. The local Medicaid authorities quarantined the area and assured the planetary governor that production would not be affected. But within a month the sickness had spread across multiple hives, accompanied by unsettling rise in disorder, gangs clashing in the streets, labourers attacking overseers, and administratum clerks refusing to report for duty. When the Adeptus Arbites arrived, summoned by urgent astropathic petition, they quickly realised the disease was not natural. Verispex investigators found traces of warp taint in the blood of infected. Witnesses spoke of robed figures preaching salvation through decay, promising release from toil in the embrace of the grandfather. The Arbiters needed no further proof. This was the work of a Nurgle cult. Lord Marshal Varon Corda took command of the operation from the moment his boots touched Typhos' prime steel decking. His orders were swift and absolute. A planetary state of emergency, all transit between hives suspended, and a full curfew enforced by the Arbites garrison and loyalist elements of the planetary defence forces. This was not a police action, it was a purge. The Arbites began by isolating the worst afflicted districts, deploying armoured repressors and riot lines to seal streets. From elevated positions and fortified choke points, marksmen covered every avenue of approach. Vox networks were commandeered to broadcast the Emperor's decrees and warnings to stay indoors. Those who defied the curfew were detained, those who resisted were cut down without hesitation. At first, the strategy seemed to contain the spread, but the cult's corruption was deeper than anyone anticipated. It had seeded itself in the Manufactoria's leadership, among foremen, overseers, even within the planetary's tithing offices. The Arbites soon discovered that production schedules were being falsified, critical shipments diverted to warehouses under cult control, These caches not only held weapons and munitions, but also crude chemical dispersal devices meant to carry the plague into untouched hives. Corda responded with a network of search and destroy patrols, each assigned a sector to scour. Equipped with Auspex scanners tuned to detect biological anomalies, they combed the hab blocks floor by floor. When a cache was found, it was destroyed immediately, often with fire and melter charges, regardless of collateral damage. The Arbites' view was uncompromising. The Emperor's realm could afford to replace infrastructure, but not an entire planet lost to chaos. Resistance intensified as the cult realised its control was slipping. Infected gangs launched suicidal charges against Arbites' barricades. Their bodies erupted in clouds of virulent spores when struck down. Other cultists fought with shocking resilience, seemingly impervious to wounds, chanting praises to the pestilent god even as they bled. Every engagement risked infection. Arbitrators fought in sealed carapace suits, their visors fogged with sweat, their breathing laboured through filtration units. The turning point came when Corda's forces intercepted encrypted Vox traffic revealing the cult's leadership had gathered in Hive Vindex, a sprawling industrial complex in the planet's northern hemisphere. The Hive's manufacturer had been silent for weeks, its output reduced to nothing, but the Arbites' reconnaissance revealed heavy movement within its sealed walls. It was here, intelligence suggested, that the cult maintained its temple and summoned the blessings of Nurgle in full. The assault on Hive Vindex was a grim, methodical advance. Repressors rolled forward in wedge formations, their heavy flamers clearing streets of cultists. Above, Arbites sharpshooters picked off plague carriers before they could close with the armour. Progress was slow. The streets were choked with barricades of twisted scrap, and the air was thick with the stench of rot. Those who fell in combat risked more than death. A single touch from the cult's champions could transmit the infection, and so wounded arbitrators were either evacuated under strict quarantine or granted the Emperor's peace on the spot. At the Hive's centre, the Arbites found the temple, a profane edifice built from corrupted machinery, its surfaces alive with writhing fungal growths. The air shimmered with warp energy, and the chanting of hundreds of voices rolled through the corridors. At its altar stood the cult's high priest, a bloated figure swaddled in rusted armour, his body a hive of sores and oozing wounds. Corda himself led the breach. Shock mauls crackled as the first arbitrators stormed the temple floor. Shotguns roared in disciplined bursts. The cultists fought with fanatical abandon, wielding rusted chains, spiked pipes and plague-ridden knives. In the chaos, the high priest called upon his god, summoning a wave of pestilent energy that withered steel and flesh alike. Several arbitrators fell screaming, their armour dissolving into sludge, their bodies unrecognisable moments later. It was relentless bolter fire from the command squad that finally brought down the priest, his massive frame collapsing into a pool of his foul ichor. The moment he fell, the psychic pressure in the air broke, and the surviving cultists scattered or dropped to their knees in mindless worship. Arbites squads moved without pause, executing the incapacitated and burning the temple to its foundations. The aftermath of the purging was as grim as the battle itself. Vast sections of Hive Vindex and other infected districts were sealed permanently, their entrances collapsed with demolition charges to prevent any resurgence of the plague. Tens of thousands of corpses were now consigned to incinerators, their ashes scattered in consecrated pits. The surviving population was subjected to exhaustive screening. Those who failed were quietly removed from the census, their fate never recorded in public archives. Typhos Prime's output suffered for years afterwards, its manufactoria crippled by the loss of skilled labour and vital infrastructure. But the world remained in Imperial hands, and the plague cult was eradicated before it could prepare the way for demonic incursion. In the sealed records of the Arbites, the purging of Typhos Prime is remembered not for tactical brilliance, but for its sheer, uncompromising execution, the willingness to destroy in order to preserve. For the Adeptus Arbites, Typhos Prime was another reminder that their role is not merely to enforce the law, but to defend the very survival of the Imperium against threats that wear human faces until the moment they strike. The Black Carapace and Aquila do not protect them from disease or demon, they protect them from hesitation. On Typhos Prime, hesitation would have meant damnation. When recruits study the case, they are told the same truth that guided Lord Marshal Corda through the stinking streets and plague-ridden halls. The law cannot heal the sick or save the corrupted, but it can burn the infection before it spreads. And that, in the end, is the only cure the Imperium could afford. In the unending expanse of the void, there are places even the Emperor's servants speak of in hushed tones. Regions where the light of the Astronomicon dims and the stars themselves seem to retreat into shadow. Among these is the Harrow Vortex, a region of shifting warp storms and dead systems on the edge of Segmentum Obscurus. Few Imperial vessels venture willingly, and fewer still return. It was in the shadow of this cursed expanse that the Adeptus Arbites were called to act. A chain of vital way stations along the Imperial trade routes had gone silent. Merchant convoys failed to arrive at their destinations. Astropathic distress calls came through garbled, half swallowed by static. The Administratum feared piracy, perhaps even predations of alien raiders, and dispatched Arbites contingents to investigate. What they found was not piracy, it was something far darker. The first sign came at Port Helica, a refueling station orbiting the frozen moon of Threx. The station's lights still burned, and the automated docking beacons pulsed in the darkness, but there was no human activity. Arbites boarding parties advanced through corridors littered with overturned cargo crates and discarded tools. Vox channels were eerily quiet, save for a low, rhythmic static that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. In the command spire they found the crew. Every man, woman and child dead at their posts, their eyes burned black and their bodies locked in postures of devotion before a crude shrine of the Emperor. No signs of violence, no wounds, and no signs of disease. Forensic scans revealed an intense psychic residue lingering in the air, as if the very fabric of the place had been scorched by some unseen hand. The Arbites Verispex analysts feared what the evidence implied. This was not the work of heretics or Xenos, but of something birthed in the warp itself. A rogue astropathic choir, perhaps, or a fragment of a demonic incursion that had slipped through the unstable currents of the Harrow Vortex. In either case, it was a threat to navigation and Imperial authority alike. Lord Marshal Rin Malcor of the Arbites detachment aboard the Lex Imperius ordered a sector-wide quarantine. All stations and outposts along the fringe were to go into lockdown until the source of the phenomenon could be located and destroyed. Malcor's mandate was clear. The Emperor's law did not end at the edge of the light. It burned all the brighter in the darkness. The investigation took them deeper into the blackness, from derelict cargo haulers drifting cold in space to mining colonies where the inhabitants had vanished entirely, leaving meals still warm on metal tables. Every site bore the same signature: the psychic scorch, the makeshift shrine, and the absence of struggle. As the Arbites advanced, their own Vox traffic began to degrade. Some arbitrators reported hearing whispers in the static, prayers in High Gothic promising salvation if only they would open their eyes. The breakthrough came at Waystation Callist, the largest installation in the chain. Here, the Arbites finally encountered the living. Dozens of station crew and travellers knelt in the docking bays, eyes closed, their lips moving in silent prayer. When approached, they rose in perfect unison, speaking as one: "The blackness comes, but the Emperor's light guides us. Come to him." It was then the attacker struck, not with weapons, but with the psychic wave that crashed through the minds of the boarding party. Arbitrators clutched at their helmets, some collapsing, others turning their shotguns on their comrades. Those who resisted fired into the crowd, but the enthralled did not flinch, advancing with arms outstretched as though to embrace their executioners. Malcor ordered a full purge of the station. Flamers roared through the docking bays, their heat reflecting in the visor glass of the arbitrators who forced themselves to keep advancing. In the command centre, they found the source, an astropathic relay chamber, its consoles fused into a single mass of metal and bone. At its heart was a figure that once been human, now swollen and warped by the warp's touch. Its mouth stretched wide in a rictus grin as it chanted ceaselessly into the void. The creature's death was as much an act of will as it was weapons. Bolt of fire shredded its body, but only when Malcor himself drove his shock maul through its skull did the psychic pressure break. The remaining enthralled fell where they stood, lifeless in an instant, and their minds burned out as the link was severed. Even with the source destroyed, the Harrow Vortex did not release its grip easily. The Arbites spent weeks conducting sweeps of every outpost and vessel along the route, rooting out pockets of survivors whose minds had been permanently broken by the encounter. Each was judged and, more often than not, executed to prevent any resurgence of the phenomenon. When the Lex Imperius finally emerged from the blackness, its holds were heavy with the ashes of the dead and the records of the purge. In the Hall of Judgment on Hydra IV, the incident was entered into the annals not as a battle or suppression, but as an illumination protocol, the cleansing of an Imperial territory where darkness, literal and metaphysical, had threatened to eclipse the Emperor's light. In the centuries that followed, the Harrow Vortex remained unstable, its storms closing and reopening like the breath of some sleeping giant. But Imperial ships still crossed its fringes, guided by carefully plotted routes and the silent vigilance of the Arbites stationed at every way station. On their armour, some bore a small sigil, a sunburst on a field of black, commemorating the campaign. It served as a reminder to all who saw it, that even in the deepest dark the Emperor's light still shines, and those sworn to uphold his law will stand as its keepers until their last breath. This concludes the sanctioned transmissions from Dominissimo Voxlore. Your compliance in receiving this dispatch is noted. Your loyalty is recorded in the Emperor's ledger. By the authority of the Lex Imperialis, all loyal citizens are instructed to seal their oath of fealty. Subscribe to this channel, activate the sacred notification chime, and stand by for the next summons. Maintain vigilance. Remember, the Emperor's law is everywhere, and so are we.